If you're the person in your family who looked at the generational dysfunction, the unspoken secrets, or the toxic communication styles, and finally said, "I'm not doing this anymore," society usually just labels you the black sheep, the rebel, or the difficult one. But you are far more than a stereotype. You belong to a very specific psychological category known as the cycle breaker. And what happens in the brain of someone who is the only one in their family trying to heal creates something genuinely worth examining. So today, we're going to explore what makes the cycle breaker so interesting from a psychological perspective. From the start, you spent your childhood in an environment where dysfunction was just called normal. Every family has a blueprint, a set of rules for how to argue, how to show love, and how to hide secrets. Most people grow up and simply absorb that family blueprint without question. They repeat the behaviors of their parents, who repeated the behaviors of their parents. Cycle breakers, however, went through a completely different psychological development. Even at a young age, you possessed a hyper-awareness. You were the kid who watched the adults around you sweep things under the rug, communicate through passive aggression, or repeat destructive habits, and your brain registered a fundamental disconnect. You had the quiet, heavy realization that the adults in charge didn't actually know what they were doing. Consider the implications of this on your early life. While your siblings or peers might have just played along with the family narrative to keep the peace, you couldn't unsee the toxicity. You became the emotional whistleblower of your own home, and that required a completely different kind of situational awareness than what the rest of your family developed. As you moved into adulthood, you started looking outward. You went to therapy, read books, or simply observed healthier relationships, and you realized that the way your family operated wasn't the only way to live. This created a kind of psychological bilingualism that is actually incredibly rare and incredibly exhausting. You can sit in a room with your family and completely understand the deep, unhealed generational trauma driving their behavior. You speak their language. You know exactly why your mother is overly critical or why your father avoids emotions. But at the exact same time, you possess the emotional vocabulary of a healthy adult trying to set boundaries. You understand the dysfunction, but you refuse to participate in it. You experience both dynamics at the exact same time, effectively translating between a toxic past and a healthy future. But here is where things get messy. Because you spent your formative years learning the family rules and your adult years trying to rewrite them, you become a designated threat to the family system. Research on family systems theory shows that a family operates like a mobile hanging over a crib. If you pull on one piece, the whole thing shakes. When you decide to set a boundary, or go to therapy, or stop participating in the family drama, the unhealthy system will instinctively attack you to maintain its equilibrium. They will call you too sensitive, selfish, or claim you think you are better than them. You are forced to carry this underlying current of guilt running through your decision-making. People who break generational trauma suffer from something psychologists call ambiguous loss. You are grieving the loss of a family that is still alive. You are mourning the parents you needed but never got, while simultaneously dealing with the actual parents who are still calling your phone. It is a psychological heavy lifting that most people simply cannot comprehend. The cultural conversation tends to treat the black sheep as someone who is just angry, bitter, or hateful toward their family. But the cycle breaker deals with a paradox that's honestly pretty unusual. You actually have massive empathy for where your family came from. You see the pain of your parents and grandparents clearly, yet you know that empathy cannot come at the expense of your own mental health. You have to maintain an ironclad distance to protect your own peace. Independent but grieving, deeply connected to your roots but entirely alienated from them, loving but detached, understanding but completely uncompromising. What seems to define the cycle breaker is this ability to hold heavy contradictions without letting them destroy you. If you are a cycle breaker, you probably spend a lot of your life feeling completely exhausted and entirely out of place, caught between the generations that came before you and the new legacy you're trying to build. It's not a fault. That's actually the defining feature of your psychological experience. In a world that often values keeping the peace over telling the truth, having the courage to look at your family's history and say, "This stops with me," is one of the most difficult, valuable things a human being can do. You are taking on the emotional debt of generations so that the people who come after you don't have to. If this resonated with you, I'd really appreciate you subscribing to Mind Nest.